Good evening. Tonight I'm going to try to do a video I've been meaning to do for a while, which is life's lessons from the Beatles. You can draw life's lessons from sports, how to hit a home run in the game of life, and everything. You can find life lessons in all kinds of things. And I think as the years have gone by, the amazing story of the Beatles has offered us a lot of life lessons. So I'm going to give my little list of 10 life's lessons from the Beatles. I'm going to try to keep it short. Let me just say that I've prefaced this with recommending a film. It's called In His Life, the John Lennon Story, which chronicles the early years of the Beatles. It's a biopic about John Lennon's early years, really kind of ends with them going on the Ed Sullivan Show. But it's a great. It's not an artsy film. It's just a very factual. I think they were really careful trying to just really depict everything. The way people talked, the kind of clothes people wore, and working class Liverpool. It's all filmed on locations there. It's an excellent movie, and actually a lot of my life's lessons are from that film that I watched. I've watched it several times. I think it's a great movie. Not a fancy movie. It's not a. But if you're like the Beatles or you want to teach someone the story of the Beatles, I recommend it. The first life's lesson is the old 10,000 hours lesson, that you get really good at something by doing it for 10,000 hours, and that achieves mastery. That's a famous theory that came out in a book a few years ago. I've heard people say that's not necessarily true. You could practice something you're not good at and you don't have talent in for 20,000 hours and maybe never be that good, and someone else could come along with an unbelievable amount of God-given talent and do great, far short of 10,000 hours, disgustingly so. Someone said, Jimi Hendrix said there were people that got great pretty quickly, and didn't seem like they did 10,000 hours. But I think the overall point is so well taken that you do things a lot, and when you look at the Beatles, they played so much in those early years, and that's kind of under the radar screen. When they got famous, it seemed like it was so fast, and they seemed so young and fresh, but they'd been playing and playing, particularly when you think about all those years in Hamburg, Germany. So by the time they got on the Ed Sullivan Show, they were young, but they were seasoned professional musicians, and they used to play hours and hours and hours a day. And I guess I just think of the playing I've done, which is minuscule compared to someone like that. But how grumpy people get, 2 or 3 nights a week, and I can too sometimes. But you just think about the grueling schedule those guys put in, and that's what made them good. When they came back from Hamburg, I've heard Pete Best, the drummer for the Beatles in those days, say they just would explode with energy because anything they played, it was just boom, because they'd had all that experience, and no doubt that all those probably lousy gigs, late nights, not enough money, people don't show up, no one's in the place, everything you can think of. People request songs you don't know, and maybe you're not that good that night. All those things that make for bad gigs, they did all that. But they kept doing it, and they put in all those hours, and look what it produced. To get to the level they got, which is an amazingly high level of songwriting and craftsmanship. They definitely exemplify that theory of 10,000 hours to the extent it's true. The second life's lesson from the Beatles is play, don't practice. That sounds kind of counterintuitive. Of course, you need to practice your instrument or whatever you want to do. You need to practice, but they got out there and they played, and sometimes they weren't that good. But I've heard Paul McCartney say they would go in and not even know what they were doing, or particularly before their lineup really kind of formed, they'd have people show up that couldn't play or whatever, and they just get up there and find a way to get through the night. And they played and they played, and that's how they got so good. And I always think of my uncle. My uncle was a great sax player, and but he was kind of an easygoing man. He played all over the thumb of Michigan, and he always talked about that one time they practiced in 1957. Which is kind of funny, but and I think their practice turned into kind of a social occasion where they sat around and talked about their ideas for the group and everything. But they would get out there and play. They all knew a lot of songs, and they usually he surrounded himself with a few people that knew a lot of songs, and they'd just get out there and play, and someone would request something, and they'd get through it, and they kept doing it, and after a while they would really develop an awesome repertoire, and it was from playing. It wasn't from sitting around practicing and waiting for that golden moment when you're ready to get out there. That was the Beatles. They got out there and played all the time, and they just kept getting better and better. And really, if they'd stayed in John Lennon's bedroom up in his Aunt Mimi's apartment all those years, waiting till they were, they wrote something like Revolver, they'd still be there today, old men, So play. Get out there and play. Life's lesson number 2 from the Beatles. Life's lesson number 3 from the Beatles is play with the best players available. That's a good one. The pieces kind of fell into place for the Beatles, but not right away. So they play. They were the Quarry. John Lennon had a group called the Quarrymen with a bunch of Liverpool locals that I'm sure were okay and everything. And then he met Paul McCartney famously in 1957, and pretty soon they met George Harrison, and they had Stu Sutcliffe for a while, who really wasn't a musician by most accounts, but he was a good guy and a great artist, tragically died. They had a drummer named Pete Best, and they had to get him to go to Hamburg. The story of Pete Best being fired, of course, is a sad one in a lot of ways, but on the other hand, they needed a drummer to go to Hamburg. He was available, and he did it. And the rest of his life, he was able to say he had that experience. So, but they would play with whoever they could get. It's kind of like point number 2. Play, don't practice. They played with whoever they could find that was available to show up, and over time, kind of organically, that awesome 4-piece lineup that we know as the Beatles kind of took shape. But it didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen from, again, sitting around in a bedroom and having auditions for 10 years till they found, George, Paul, and, Ringo and John there. It happened organically from the act of playing all the time. You start with people that can play and, work people out, show up and play, and the rest is history. Life's lesson number 4 from the Beatles, and the story of the Beatles and John Lennon, is church is community. John Lennon and Paul McCartney met at a church picnic, a church social. And John Lennon and his band, the Quarrymen, were playing there, and then Paul McCartney kind of came in to the fellowship hall, as it were, and met them. And I've always thought that's kind of a neat lesson, because no one's trying to pretend that the Beatles are sort of religious figures or, represent religion or Christianity or anything. But it does remind me that the church has played an important community role in public life, and that was certainly true in England, and maybe it was more true when they were kids in the 50s. But I don't think it was a particularly sacred, devout event, but it was a community, and the public space of the church was there to bring people together, and that's how John Lennon and Paul McCartney met, and the whole town was kind of there, and it was sort of for those neighborhoods that lived in that part of Liverpool, and that was their community space in a way. And the graveyard next to the church was where I think Eleanor Rigby and some of those famous graves that are associated with the Beatles also are found. So. John Lennon got in trouble in the '60s for saying the Beatles were more popular than God. I don't know. I'm not trying to say they were religious in any kind of sectarian way. I think Ringo Starr has some religious beliefs of a sort, and of course George Lennon was spiritual, but that's not my point really. It's just that the church has played a historic role in a lot of Western societies, and I think, and maybe especially more in the 50s than today, alas. But you see it there. If it were not for that church in Liverpool, the Beatles would have never maybe happened. So church is community. It's religion, it's confession and doctrine and all that, I suppose. But if all else fails, it's community. It's a place, it's this public space to bring people together. And that was the Beatles, and they came out of that world, and you know, it was just kind of part of their background as being kids in Liverpool. You know, being, you know, the church was kind of a place to hang out and, you know, do stuff like that, and that's how Paul McCartney and John Lennon met, at a church picnic where John Lennon and his band, the Quarrymen, were playing. Paul McCartney came in after the first set, as it were, first show, and was introduced to John. I think Paul was about 14, and he played, what, 7 Flight Rock or something like that. And John said, "Hey, you're pretty good." And, you know, within a few days, Paul McCartney and John Lennon were a team, and they kind of never looked back. Church is community. Lesson number 5 is a really good one. Cover tunes make better songwriters. The Beatles were a great cover band. They knew so many songs, and their early albums really, you know, when you consider Lennon and McCartney being the great songwriters they are, their early albums have a surprising amount of cover tunes. You know, Chuck Berry songs. They do "Taste of Honey." They do a song from the Music Man, "Till There Was You." I mean, they played anything, and that again comes from playing in bars and maybe growing up in homes with music. They played anything, you know. They weren't like, oh, we're this kind of band or that kind of band. And I know I've played quite a bit, and you know, people come up and request things, and usually if you play a verse or two, you know, they're happy, and you kind of sometimes it, you know, maybe it's something you want to do again. But that made them better songwriters, because when they started writing songs, they had that deep repertoire and knowledge of history. They were in the songwriting, and all those songs that they were able to build on and surpass or evolve from. But I guess I feel like I see so many people that say, "Oh, I just play my own songs," which is nice to say. You know, Gordon Lightfoot only plays his own songs. Then again, you know, he's got a catalog of, you know, 300 songs or something that are some of the great songs ever. So, but good song. But you know, he got that way from playing in bars and learning the craft of songwriting by playing other people's music. So when I hear people say, "Oh, I just play my own songs," not always, but a lot of times it's because they really can't play other people's songs. They can't sit and play a Jim Croce song. They can't sit and play a Beatles song. And that sort of is a tip that maybe their songwriting is going to be kind of limited. That doesn't mean they stink or something, but that really great top-notch commercial songwriting comes from people who understand songwriting, and you can only really understand songwriting by playing a lot of different songs, especially when you're young, I guess. But they were a cover band, you know. I mean, they did, again, pointing at Hamburg, they did all kinds of stuff. You know, when you play 6 hours, 8 hours in a night, you play everything but the kitchen sink, you know. And then when they started writing songs, they had some footing to go on, you know. They knew what a good song was, and they knew what crowds liked, and all that came from, you know, just playing anything. They played, like I said, they played everything but the kitchen sink. And I've heard Paul McCartney say that they'd play anything, you know, and obviously worked, didn't it? So cover songs make better songwriters. Don't just, you know, especially if you're young and you're learning, play other people's songs. But wait till you hear my next point. Point number 6 follows point number 5. Cover songs make better songwriters. Point number 6 is play songs, don't cover songs. So they would take a song and they would play it. They weren't necessarily sitting there agonizing all night about, you know, getting the guitar solo just like it was on some record. You know, maybe they did that some, But they played the song, and especially a lot of those standards. I was thinking songs like Georgia. You don't have to play it just like Ray Charles. A lot of artists, they'll take songs and kind of just do them, and figure out the basic chord structure and just do it. Maybe change the key to fit your voices or whatever. You can take standard. I guess a good thing is to take standards, songs that have stood the test of time, and play them. And you don't even necessarily have to consider that you're covering some particular artist. You're just doing a song, as an artist yourself. And so when you do hear the Beatles do like "Taste of Honey" or "Till There Was You," or Chuck Berry songs, they do them their own way, and that kind of made them special. Now, obviously, by the mid '60s, they were just doing all their own stuff because their songs were so good that they were better than most of the cover songs out there. But they got that way by playing other people's songs, and they got so original by just playing the song, not necessarily meticulously imitating particular versions of songs. Lesson number 7 is have fun. You look at the Beatles, they were always having fun. I think that's one of the reasons they say Pete Best was let go. He wasn't really that fun to be around, among other things. I like Pete Best. I watched a lot of interviews with him. But they were having fun all the time. And, music, they call it playing music, not working music. Music is fun. And they always had fun. And the reason that's important is because it makes you a better player. You can relax. I think we've all been in high stress environments of any kind, and it's hard to do your best. And some environments are naturally stressful. You play in front of a lot of people, or the Queen, like they did. I'm sure you get the butterflies and everything when you think about the magnitude of it. But on the other hand, have fun. And they definitely did. And they were relaxed and enjoying themselves, and that's so important. They were lighthearted and witty and funny, and they didn't take themselves too seriously, and that's why they were 10 times better than a lot of people who do take themselves so seriously. A lot of people, when they take themselves really serious, they take music really seriously, but it's not really the music they're taking seriously, it's themselves. And they're so hung up on themselves and taking themselves seriously that they can't relax and have fun with the music, and that's kind of limiting in some ways. It's a balance, but have fun. Point number 8, life's lessons from the Beatles is love, not sex. The Beatles, I'm sure they had no shortage of lady friends and everything, but they sang about love, and their music was about love, and all the attractive women dancing, all the sexy fun stuff that goes along with it. But they wrote love songs and songs from the heart. And I think that's why they stood the test of time. And I like the old Saturday night, gonna go out on the town kinds of party music, which might be a little more sexual oriented. I grew up listening to some of that stuff too, and I like it. It's rock and roll. But the Beatles wrote love songs, and I think that's one of the reasons their music has stood so long. They weren't afraid to love, and I think that's what connects with people. And as the years go by, love is what remains. All you need is love, I believe the saying goes. And that's positive. That was a positive thing, and it meant a lot of things. It meant sort of romantic love between men and women, obviously, but also love between people and so on. And I don't mean in a political way, but the love movement of the late '60s, they were so critical. Played such a critical part in, and so write about love. Think of positive things. The Beatles were a very positive, upbeat group, and they sang about loving relationships and caring about people, not just how good looking they were. They sang, there's nothing wrong with singing about, if you think someone's beautiful and you want to, sing a song about her, You wouldn't be the first one, and you probably won't be the last one, and that's fine. That's a good thing, you know. But they, you know, when the rubber hit the road, they wrote beautiful love songs about the people in their lives, or you know, people they imagined, and that message of love is so important, and that's a life lesson from the Beatles. Lesson number 9 is another important one, and I think for those of us who are musicians, and that is play songs, not riffs. I think and if you do that, you'll end up being a better riff player. I like riffs. You know, Jimmy Page is a great riff guitarist, but they have great songs, and you know, riffs follow the song. So you come out with the idea of a song, and you can take a lot of the classic Beatles riffs like Day Tripper, you know, I Feel Fine. You know, any of those songs, whether like Drive My Car, Paperback Writer, those are great guitar riffs, and they're not flashy, but if you try to play them, they're you know, they're really well put together. They're not all that easy, really. You don't hear too many people play the Beatles that well, but they're great songs, and the song comes before the riff. So you could take a song like Paperback Writer, or you know, any of those songs, I Feel Fine, and you could just grab a box guitar and do it as a song, you know, with the basic chord structure. So I don't know. I've played with a lot of people, and I think there are a lot of bands actually, particularly when I was growing up, that had great riffs, great leads. They didn't have really great songs, so you know, the song is what you take away. And some of those riff players can sound great. But if the riff isn't in the service of a song that's a whole, that connects to a whole idea, every song has some idea or point or message or something, then the riff it doesn't have the clarity in the point. So great riff guitarists, whether you know Ritchie Blackmore, or, you know, is another one, but they wrote great riffs in the service of great songs, and I think that's the Beatles all the way. You know, they have some of the most iconic riffs in the history of music, but they're attached to great songs, and you could take away those riffs, and you have a pared down, you know, just grab a piano or a single box guitar, and you've got a great song. And the riffs are complements to the song. The riffs might be integral to the song, but you have a song. You know, you're not just riffs and leads. And sometimes I think that you see that in jazz and blues. Sometimes I love jazz and blues, but when it's even however great the musicianship is, if it's not attached to really coherent songs that make sense as a whole. No matter how great the solos are and the riffing is and the playing is, you're missing a critical part of the music, because you know the song is so important. Really, life's lesson number 10 from the Beatles is use gear that works and is affordable. You don't have to get the best gear. They always met their needs, so they, you know. And I think it's really kind of neat that they're especially associated with a lot of brands that you know, aren't necessarily considered the elite boutique brands. You know, they used a lot of Epiphones. Of course, Epiphone in that day was a good guitar, and still is. You know, I'm not cutting down Epiphone, but you know, but they played with Epiphones, Rickenbackers, you know. Gretches that, you know, Gretsch is a really nice guitar, but they particularly are associated with Epiphone because they, you know, those guitars work. They play, you know, they played pretty well in tune. These guys were working class guys, you know. I think they had, you know, Epiphone acoustic guitars too, that Texan that they used to play. So, you know, I always think that's a lesson. They got what they needed, you know. And what they could afford, and they, you know, and you can get some good gear and go out there and play professional shows with, you know, good, affordable, reliable gear, and you know, if you're Paul McCartney in 1978 and you want to spend a ton of money on some really fancy, you know, Fender or Gibson or something, well, who can blame you? But when they were coming up, they had good, affordable gear. They made good music with it, and that's an important life's lesson. You know, And they got out again. It's kind of like when they put their band together. They got out there and played with what they had, who they had, and they were young guys. And John Lennon's first guitar was famously guaranteed not to crack. I mean, he. And but he was associated with Epiphone, and Paul McCartney did paperback writer on an Epiphone, so they were pretty closely associated with Epiphone, and I think Paul McCartney still likes to endorse Epiphone because so many artists that it's all Fender, Gibson, or PRS, or some of the really and I love particularly Fender. I'm a huge Fender fan, but you play with the gear you have. What a great life's lesson. So those were the life's lesson from the Beatles. And if you get a chance to watch that movie In His Life, I think that's where you'll see the sort of formative years of the Beatles pretty accurately depicted in that movie. Not in a theatrical or artsy way, but just a pretty matter-of-fact way, and with attention to the scene in Liverpool that the Beatles came from, and you get a lot of there's a lot more we could think of, but those are 10 things, and I think it's inspiring, and of course, if you like music, it's hard not to like the Beatles, I guess, but just as really major figures of the 20th century, it's what a great band and what a legacy. And when you look at how they rose and everything, there are indeed a lot of life's lessons, and not just for success in the music business, well, that's part of it, but for meaningful and fulfilling life. The Beatles, we don't want to start a religion based on the Beatles or anything, but there'd be worse things. So, life's lessons from the Beatles, and I'm going to play a little bit of on my Strat here, a little bit of Beatles instrumental, Beatles style instrumental. Hope you enjoy.